think there's a critique of Deleuze or a critique of Deleuze's sudden like explosion of popularity, right? There's a sort of weird event where I released a video on Deleuze and like 10 other channels did. And if you like me go to bookstores and go to the philosophy section, like the Deleuze section is growing and growing, and more obscure works of his are being carried in bookstores. And of course, on the memosphere, there's all kinds of stuff. And I wonder, people often connect it up to like, oh, well, we live in this like rhizomatic postmodern moment, like Trump is a simulacrum of a president. The internet is a rhizome. Capital is deterritorializing everything, and that's why people are attracted to Deleuze. But I wonder, since what I see Deleuze as doing is as being situated in relation to a sort of anti-Hegelian, anti-Marxist view of history, where you just sort of get these discrete epochs, where like a new horizon of meaning appears that's totally incommensurable with the previous ones. There's no level at which you can talk about progress. There's no level at which you can say the bourgeois revolution was an improvement over feudalism, etc. I feel like Deleuze's ontology of differences is almost sort of providing precisely an ontology to account for how the world can sort of just switch from one incommensurable horizon of meaning to another. And my concern there is that, and this is getting to my own particular interpretation of Deleuze, but is that what the ontology of difference amounts to at a certain point is a kind of limit to language and thought. It seems to me that this sort of world of the multiplicity and the pure difference is not something that you can actually think about and describe in terms of I don't know what we would recognize as rational thought. You can, as Todd May, the Deleuze scholar, put it, you can sort of palpate it. You can sort of get a Bergsonian intuition for it, but you can't fully capture it in language. And so my concern is that what this amounts to are just two things. One is that it's a sort of capitulation to the chaos of our time, to look at what is, at least on the surface, rhizomatic and chaotic and impossible to interpret, and not to say, okay, this is a surface appearance. The rhizomatic appearance of our society is actually grounded in contradiction and the crisis of capitalism, and a refusal to also engage in a way of looking at history that allows you to identify points of progress, points of regress, and also to say there's a better world that we can build. So that's a concern that I have about this sort of Deleuze fad that we're living in. Not necessarily that he would hold these things, I'm not sure about that, but that he can at least be used as a way to say, like, to just take the rhizome appearance and not say, okay, what are the contradictions that are producing this, just to say, oh, that's it, that's all there is. You're, being aberrant if you try to interpret it further.
Could you explain? Because I just know for a fact that there's at least one person in the chat who's like, "What the fuck are you talking about?"
Yeah, I just said like some bunch of psychobabble.
Yeah.
Where to begin? Yeah, do you have a specific question? Because I'm
Well,
overwhelmed.
so I guess it's like, okay, so the aberrant versus the rhizome. If you look on the screen, I have a depiction of the rhizome. It's a bunch of roots. And if, like, that's what a rhizome is a bunch of roots where there's no one starting point. And then this is juxtaposed to the arborescent, which is like trees, which is like flowcharts. There's a point of departure. The point of the internet is just like rhizomes. There's no beginning. You're always in the middle of everything. So intuitively, that carries a lot of weight for us, I think. But at the same time, though, people, you're saying maybe assumptions about how they're reading Deleuze or something, about how all this stuff works. I'll say what I think, and then I'm not sure if this is kind of what you're saying, but it seems like it just, the phase of naive relativism, of not taking responsibility for the difficulty and complexity and actually trying to work through it, that phase of philosophical thought is sort of like given a sort of philosophical justification to not ever leave that phase if you're into Deleuze and Guattari.
Yeah, that's put it way better.
Aww.
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Chat, can you all hear us all right? Testing.
Hello, Internet.
Hello, the Normie Times. Welcome. It's nice to meet you face to face. Yeah.
Yeah. It's cool to be a part of this.
Chat was worried that I was joking about actually doing some self-care, but this is my proof. I have a whole banana. I'm going to deep throat the whole thing down to the peel. I'm kidding, I'm not. But anyway, welcome.
Thank you.
Please introduce yourself and your channel. How do you like to be addressed?
Well, okay, I guess I've been going by the Normie Times online for a while, but it feels weird to do that. So my name is Sam. It's my real name. And yeah, I created and run a channel called the Normie Times. I don't know, I made a few videos about various political topics, I guess. What the way I think about my channel is creating videos that will sort of appear in the hyperlink vortex of right-wing YouTube, and then sort of surprise the viewers and give them an alternate viewpoint. So that's the model. Whether or not it works is yet to be determined.
That is a lot of my own goals. So I think that what put you on my radar first was Cuck Philosophy, who might be joining us shortly as well.
Wow.
Yeah, Cuck made a Twitter thread, or a post, I guess, with smaller philosophy-ish, leftish YouTubers that he was trying to signal boost. Mm-hmm. And I think we still probably get notifications. I don't know, none this week, but it's been getting retweeted and liked for a couple months, it feels like.
Yeah, I mean, that was just such an awesome thing that he did for a lot of reasons. One, I mean, it's really like just good praxis, for lack of a better word. But it was also, I'm a huge fan of that channel, and
Same.
And that was like the best feeling I ever got out of doing the whole YouTube thing, of just being recognized by somebody that I respected so much. So yeah, I think that was just a great thing that he did for all those small channels.
Yeah. And you are coming at things from a more philosophical standpoint. Let's look at your channel really quick. I like to give people a quick tour. So we're going to click on it. This is the Normie Times, y'all. We're at 1.38K subscribers. What would be really cool is if that goes up, just because we're talking about this today, to at least 2K. That'd be fantastic. So people, please subscribe. Please subscribe. I'm actually memeing. Okay, when I say please subscribe, It's actually from the end of the video that we didn't finish. So we're at the 17:13 marker. We'll kind of go back to like to this point and finish the video out later today probably. But at the very end, it goes right here. Fruit. Much love.
Please subscribe. I need subscribers. I don't know where I'm gonna go if I don't have subscribers. What am I going to get a job?
This other guy or person in
What's
your
that?
video?
Oh, the person who's pretending to be me?
Yeah.
That was Scooter from the King and Queen of the Losers. Scooter and Kiwi run the King and the Queen of the Losers. Kiwi is relatively YouTube famous for why I left the left and came back for this video. Oh. So the King and the Queen of the Losers, they're right here. I'll share that link in the chat so people can check that out later. But anyway, they're great. They're fantastic people.
Yeah, I love that. I love that device of having this other person, just like your alter ego or something.
Well, what
your shadow, your Jungian shadow.
He likes to make fun of me, and I told him, you know, here's an extra hat. Now do it in front of a green screen and just like pretend you're me. Yeah. Anyway, so your channel.
Oh yeah, my channel. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, sometimes I'm afraid to show it to people because it kind of looks like a right-wing channel if you just look at it from the thumbnails and stuff, which I mean is kind of the idea, but in aggregate, it has sort of a disturbing effect for me. So I don't know. I mean, what should I say? What is there to say?
Well, let's talk about one of my favorite videos by you, just briefly maybe, and why it's important. The left's biggest flaw.
Oh, okay. I'm glad you liked that video. I have very mixed feelings about that video now.
Have you gotten a lot of critical responses yet?
Well, you know, it's kind of like most of the criticisms I get on my videos, I find to be, they usually fit into like nitpicking some little piece of the argument that's not essential to the argument, or telling me that I need to read more stuff. So I remember
which was exactly what they did on the one about fascism and Evola, right?
Oh, well, that's a whole other level of like just really disturbed people sending me things that are so obscene that it just becomes fun. But you know, there's ContraPoints, her video, the left, there's this part where Tabby is like, well, have you read Kropotkin? Well, have you read, you know, so-and-so? And I almost got that verbatim on the left's biggest flaw video. So, but what I would say about that video is that I think that it doesn't apply so much to the Marxian left. I actually think that the Marxian left does a pretty good job of avoiding those sorts of essentialist, Rousseauian ways of thinking. Which, in fact, and
so you're assuming an audience, because I did see it. So you're assuming an audience who's seen it. So you kind of have to explain what you mean by that really quick. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So the crux of the video is that I'm basically trying to criticize the view that sees something like a natural state of affairs. So one example would be the environment. And to say the environment, nature, is this thing that in its natural state is harmonious and sort of like peaceful, and, you know, this sort of like Lion King stuff. And then human beings come in and they sort of disrupt it from the outside. And I think that's a bad way of thinking. Another example that I draw out in the video.
It's inherently reactionary. It's inherently reactionary. And insofar as leftists play into it, they're being inherently reactionary. So,
yeah. And it limits, I think it basically, my view on the environment is that human beings, it's a domain in which human beings can exert their freedom. and we should take it upon ourselves to destroy nature and rebuild it in our image. And so I think a sort of environmentalist discourse that takes some sort of primordial view of nature as being the desirable thing hinders that sort of project. And then another example I draw would be the sex positive movement, which I see as taking a similar view of sexuality that says, well, sexuality is good in itself, but then it becomes perverted from the outside, and that's when you get stuff like non-consensual behavior, violent behavior, etc. And I also see that as problematic. I don't see why. I see that sexuality itself has dark impulses in it from the beginning, and it seems to me.
Are you just projecting? Are you? How do you know you're?
Yes. I'm just projecting.
You're projecting your own perverse sexuality. Now I can read into everything about your own desire. But no, I'm just kidding.
Exactly.
I want to clarify, because you keep making it about you and how you see it, but you are drawing off of some of the biggest. Well, I mean, I guess even in that video, maybe you're not even drawing so much off of them, but all of the postmodern, post-structuralist Marxists were on to this anti-humanism, anti-naturalism, post-meta-narrative critique that embraces complexity and nuance and sees those elements of the Marxist project that were really simplistic in the manifesto as the less essential parts, and the more important parts were, insofar as we can have a science of social life and change, like, what is that?
No.
So I just wanted to, like, just it's not just you, right? Like, you are representing the intellectual left in a sort of sense. Like, obviously the intellectual left isn't all of those things, but that is where you're going to find the xenofeminist manifesto, the alt-woke manifesto, the accelerationist manifesto, all three of which are on this, what you're talking about right now. So
Right, yeah. No, you're right. I guess I've often felt, I don't know, it's a tricky question how to contextualize what you're saying and how much credit you should give, because obviously, like, a lot of stuff in that video is heavily influenced by Slavoj Žižek, among other things. But for the purposes of communicating this stuff, I always wonder, like, how into the weeds should one get in order to give credit where credit's due, if this ultimately does have a kind of a practical and a sort of propagandistic, I would even say, not in terms of deceiving people, but what I'm always trying to do is disrupt the way that people think. And for the purposes of that, like, I don't know. Anyway.
So we start with, if for people new to political philosophy, the story typically gets told that there was Plato versus Aristotle, and then 500 or so years later there was Rome, and then 450 to 500 years later there was, like, Roman philosophy that appropriated aspects of that Greek identity towards their imperial project. That some of that then gets taken into Christianity after that gets appropriated into a universal imperial project used by the state. And then we get into modernity. Like, modernity is the after church part. God is dead, the king is dead. Critique institutions is part of the call of the Enlightenment, so that we can, what Kant said, the call of the Enlightenment is to take responsibility for your own immaturity. And part of that is realizing that it's kind of like Protestantism with Christianity. It's the Enlightenment project is that you as an individual, in a certain sense, for a society to work where we don't need a king, and we don't need a god, and we don't need a spokesperson for God or the king, like a pope or something like that, it's going to require individuals developing their abilities to critique and adjudicate or judge between true and false, just and unjust things themselves. And that for Western civilization up to modernity had always been about a few elites, a few authorities. They get to do that, but that it's not realistic anymore. And so either we're all screwed, or people are going to get the hang of this thing. And then basically everything after that is, well, you have Marx, who tries to take the Enlightenment project to a serious scientific critique of the institutions that capitalism didn't come out of a vacuum, it came out of feudalism. And in a lot of ways, it's just like feudalism 2.0. The free market is just the economic actors being freed up to have to compete between capitalists for lower wages than they would have gotten initially from capitalists in the first place. And then obviously there was like that short period of time with the New Deal where it's like, hey, it's okay, we can have our cake and eat it too. But then neoliberalism came in and was like, just kidding, fuck you and your cake.
Yeah. No, I think it's the more I learn about intellectual history, the more Marx appears to me as like the last Enlightenment thinker. Even to a sort of extreme. I've unfortunately been reading Steven Pinker recently because I'm thinking that.
I'm sorry.
About his whole thing. Oh my God! I mean, he's the lowest low. But what's so fascinating is that he sort of lays out this completely wrong-headed theory of what makes somebody an Enlightenment thinker. That of course like disqualifies Hume and the Marquis de Sade and Kant and all the major Enlightenment thinkers from being Enlightenment thinkers, except Marx. Marx is maybe the only Enlightenment thinker that fits Pinker's model. But of course, Pinker is ideologically and monetarily compelled because he works for the Koch brothers or the Koch family now, to disqualify Marx, even when he fits his model. So anyway, it's. But where were you going with your sort of summary of political history? It sounds like you were setting up this in order to undermine it.
You're right. I was going to actually get to Rousseau because I believe that that was all the lead up to Rousseau. So I'm so happy you brought it back around. So Rousseau was actually, according to a conservative political philosophy professor I had at one point, Rousseau was actually the only photo hanging over the writing desk that Marx was writing at for a long time. So, Hegel and Marx both looked to the French Revolution and to the ideas that fed it as something truly unique in history for a lot of reasons. And Rousseau was sort of the daddy of that, even though he was the worst dad ever. So maybe while I go plug in the flamingo that's unplugged behind me, that's been bothering me, while I go do that, could you launch into a little thing that explains to someone who's sitting in their political philosophy 101 class, I just set up that whole narrative. What does Rousseau come in as a response to, like, okay, you've got the state of nature, the state of nature as described by Hobbes. Pinker is Hobbesian through and through. And so Hobbes was this person who's characterized as kind of living in isolation, eating tar out of barrels and living off of beer, and that's basically all and he's just kind of like this person who believed that everything was purely materialistic, everything was physicalist. He writes in the Leviathan that even smiles that humans develop as habits for engaging with other people, the smile is actually a self-defense mechanism. It's not actually some deeper human goodness. So he says that before civilization in the state of nature, life is gruesome, bloody, and short, right? And you have Steven Pinker come along with his picture of hunter-gatherers before civilization. Life was brutish, nasty, and short. Yes, sometimes you had a nice close-knit, civilization, or not civilization, but tribe, but, it was always short-lived. You only lived to be about 40 years old on average. He doesn't say it's because of war, but this image of nature before civilization as being fucking terrible it props up a belief that we go into civilization and giving up certain fundamental rights, trading those off to a sovereign overlord, so that we can have a safer society. Because in a society like that, there's a lot of chaos, and we want order. You know, chaos versus order. Jordan Peterson, Pinker and Peterson are just like Pinker was Peterson before Peterson. He just wasn't as antagonistic and easy to meme and slightly absurd sometimes as Pinker. Pinker comes across more as a posh liberal, sort of more of a, you know. So when he says something edgy, people kind of just ignore it, you know, because he's like a TED Talk guy, and no one cares about TED Talk guys except for people who read the New York Times. This, you know, but no. So yeah, I read his blank slate before I knew anything about political philosophy, and so that's why I was already like kind of clued into this. But Rousseau, okay, so Rousseau pops onto the scene and changes the game. How so?
Well, Rousseau's contribution is sort of to this Enlightenment discourse of the state of nature, and the state of nature is a really complex. It's a really complex question. People have different understandings of it. So one way to understand the state of nature, and the basic story is, what were humans like before civilization, before we have sort of records of history that we can look to. It's a speculative mode of thought that says what was humanity like before we developed technologically and we developed the division of labor and so on. Now, it's a question. I think it's an open question whether these theorists like Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, who discuss the state of nature, whether they actually believe it happened.
That's a really good question. Absolutely.
There's a part in the book that Rousseau wrote that people look to most for his ideas on the state of nature is called The Second Discourse on Inequality. And in the introduction to that book, I'm trying to remember what the phrasing is. He says something to the effect of like, he's doing a sort of factor analysis. He's saying, okay, humanity has features that are grounded in the individual and features that are grounded in social life. And his story of the state of nature can be read as an effect to sort of factor those things out, along the lines of Newton talking about frictionless surfaces, isolated objects. You know, this was a method of science that Newton popularized, which is to talk about objects that are simplified to an extent that they don't exist in the real world, but they allow you to describe the real world. So that's just to preface all this. Something I neglected to do in my videos, to say that it's actually ambiguous whether Rousseau really thought the state of nature happened, or whether he's sort of putting together a sort of simplified model of human beings by telling this story. But the story that Rousseau tells, in contrast to Hobbes, who saw the state of nature as being one defined by violence and selfishness and so on, Rousseau saw the natural man as being what's now called the noble savage, which is somebody who lives in complete isolation. Rousseau has kind of a funny view of how child rearing works in the state of nature. It's almost as though you have an individual, like just these separate men and women just sort of wandering through the forest, and then they just like bump into each other.
Straight up, like, this is how he writes it out. He's like, yeah, men just used to walk around, solitary men who walked around with no responsibilities, just like me, used to walk around and just impregnate whoever they wanted and just keep moving on, and everything was hunky-dory, and the women loved it, and the men loved it, and everything was great. And then all of a sudden, society's like, oh, there's responsibilities, and you have to take care of kids? Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, it's a little goofy, but it's just... I guess the essence of it is that he didn't see human beings as really inherently caring about each other one way or another. He saw basically people in the state of nature just want to survive, and they don't want to be hungry, and they don't want to be cold. and that's it. And he also thought that people have a sort of inherent distaste for suffering. So he even talks about how horses will sort of pull back and seem freaked out by seeing another horse in pain. And so he thinks that the noble savage is somebody who's on his own, basically just looking out for his or her own, immediate biological drives, and doesn't really care about anything else, but also has something of a distaste for suffering. And so, in this, by telling this story, Rousseau is pointing out that maybe we've actually lost more than we've gained through civilization, because civilization brings with it things like competition, avarice. He talks about, when we enter into civilization, this sort of just immediate desire to not be hungry gets replaced by wanting to have more food than the guy next to you, just because you feel like you have to prove yourself by having more. So out of this, Rousseau developed basically a critique of civilization, which is to say that if civilization can't at least bring us to where we were in the state of nature, then it's illegitimate. The only legitimate society is one that's sort of morally superior to the state of nature. And he does have a theory of how that can work. So reminds me a lot of ways of sort of a Christians who believe in the fortunate fall, which is to say that the fall, humanity's expulsion from the Garden of Eden was sort of a bad thing in a sort of local sense, but that it creates the possibility for an even higher state, which of course for Christians has to be realized through Jesus and stuff like that. But for Rousseau, it's through a certain kind of society. So that's my Rousseau summary.
So I'll summarize your summary.
Okay.
So we went from nature is terrible to nature is better than civilization in some ways. Mm-hmm. This is either a real belief or it's a myth that's useful for whatever reasons. And overall, you're saying it doesn't really matter. Part of the reason being a lot of people are going to take it as reality anyway. People have intuitions. People have fundamental moods that civilization is either better or worse than alternatives. If your fundamental disposition is going through life constantly fantasizing leaving civilization and starting your own commune, then you're Rousseauian through and through. And you might disagree with Rousseau on all sorts of things like child rearing, and that's valid. But there's obviously a distinction between the person who wants to get back to nature and then the accelerationist, xenofeminist, #alt-woke, how about Slavoj Žižek / Judith Butler / Elaine Badu, new post-structuralist approach that says it's a fool's errand to try to figure that out either way. It's a fool's errand to try to figure out either way. You're only appealing to people's intuitions and only some people's intuitions at that. And then obviously we end up projecting all of our fantasies, all of our desire, all of our fears onto historical narratives that, at the end of the day, they're narratives, historical narratives that, who wrote those? Oppressors. Oppressors wrote those either way. Even when someone who was an oppressor tries to write for the oppressed, there's going to be a lot lost there because obviously the subaltern is not able to have a voice under empire. That's fundamental to it. So I brought up a quote. I'm just trying to fix my audio interface right here. Okay, I brought up a quote that is perfect for what you were just talking about with Marx. Because you say that Marx makes a break So he makes a break how?
Well, I guess. Well, I see Marx picks up on Rousseau's egalitarian vision of liberated humanity. But Marx, I would include among the list of people that you said sort of reject this entire discourse of the state of nature, because um, Marx sees labor, human labor, and human creativity as having unlimited potential for transforming the natural world, to such an extent that the natural world becomes a sort of an unintelligible, unreachable category, because we always have a mediated relationship with it through labor, and and therefore, I think Marx really has a vision for a society where humanity is in complete control of the situation, where we've identified these are our productive capacity. This is what we want the world to look like. So
Right.
we're going to will it into existence, and that has it's not grounded at all on a discourse of this is natural. This is what's existed before. It's a completely forward-looking political project, and so yeah, I see Marx as basically breaking, yeah, with that whole way of thinking in a way that's preceded, I would say, by Hegel,
True.
as well. So
Yeah, because Hegel embraces the inherent contradictions in culture, society, economics, politics, etc. He sees contradictions as part of the driver of growth. Is the acorn an acorn, or is it an oak? Is it only an oak in potential? And how does it go through its various stages? Is it like at one stage it's this, and then another stage it's that? And then Hegel's answer is it's a process. It's a process of relations, and those relations have contradictions hardwired into them, and that's what galvanizes the growth process. There's a beautiful. I mean, honestly, like, people think that he's a terrible writer, but the very first page of the Phenomenology of Spirit, in the introduction, or it's in the preface, maybe it is the preface, is beautiful. The first page is where he's describing
the
a plant.
flower.
What's that?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. The plant passage is beautiful, but do you remember right before he says that, he goes on this weird tangent about like uh, uh, anatomy or something like that.
I don't remember.
It's very weird and confusing. I would agree with you. Hegel's reputation as a bad writer is completely undeserved. He could write like a normal person when he wanted to, and what he's doing in the Phenomenology of Spirit is a staggering literary achievement. I mean,
His entire project, absolutely.
every sentence in that book is describing something from like 4 different perspectives simultaneously.
Okay, Iconoclast has said a couple things that cannot go without recognition. One was Rousseau equals Tyler Durden. In quote,
Okay.
yeah, we can talk about these fantasies of revolution and how they're couched in these various theories, right? Because we could also say that Tyler Durden. Well, okay, I'd have to go back through and see. Did he think things were ever better? But he's definitely. He doesn't really have a program. He's definitely not a Marxist. He's definitely not trying to build alternatives. The whole idea is just, if we could just erase debt, we'd be fine. Right?
Right. Well, what's the thing? The Rousseauian thing comes when he's talking about like duvet covers or something like that. He's like, his whole thing is like, we're men, like we should be doing manly things out in the jungle. Instead, we're using duvet. We know what a duvet cover is, or something.
Okay, that's right. So he did think there's a natural repressed man, and I agree that there is, except that it's not a man. There's just a natural repressed animal, and it doesn't matter what gender has been assigned it. That Nietzsche lays this all out in the genealogy, where his story gets picked up by psychology, and that's the idea that you have a lot of these animal drives that need to be they need an outlet, and society essentially says no, 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 you can't, you can't, you can't. And so every time we get told no and spanked and grounded and put in the corner or whatever it is, every time there's a punishment or a reward, every time we're being manipulated to act a different way, and a lot of this is conditional love, you know, and the installation in us of fear. That every time that happens, it's putting this human animal, into a cage, and told that there's only a few proper modes or outlets for that energy, for those animal drives. Oh, you want to get satisfaction for some needs? Well, those needs are valid. Here's some right and wrong. You know, here's some right ways to satisfy those, and then the rest of the ways are wrong. And then you have different religions or ethics that step in and try to tell you like what the right things are and what the bad things are. But overall, it's a terrible, terrible thing for any human who is not who the outlets, if the outlets are not ones that are feasible for satisfying those drives, then, and if you don't have the resources, the time, energy, and attention, or communities of potential recognition and care, if you don't have any of that, then it's a nightmare. It's oppressive as hell. And so when I see edgy people online a lot of the time, I see a little bit of my former self that for a time I left a very heavily oppressive rule. There was a rule for everything. You know, you weren't allowed to do almost anything. And after leaving that, after you realize that a lot of it's like held together by lies and manipulation, you become deeply suspicious, especially if you get cast out of a church, especially if you get disowned by your family, especially if you end up homeless, especially if you're living off of, you know, couches of other people who then they might start manipulating you in their own ways, and you're very vulnerable, you're very precarious, and a lot of the people online right now are in that situation. And so usually when I see people saying edgy things, there's obviously the troll, there's obviously the bad faith actor, there's obviously the person who knows better and is exploiting your patience or your trust, but there's also people who are going to come through and say the same kinds of things that those people are saying, where they are just genuinely searching, they're genuinely lost, and I appreciate that your channel is targeting them.
Thank you. I mean, something apropos of that I think is worth bearing in mind with Fight Club in particular is that the book was written by a gay man.
A gamer?
No, a gay man, a homosexual.
Okay.
And I think, it's something that I think is covered over in the movie. The movie really emphasizes the perspective of the emasculated straight man, and that sort of brand of alienation. Now, something I think has a lot more explanatory power than the Tyler Durden sort of way of seeing things, which is to say, like, we have these aggressive drives that are being suppressed by society, and we need to somehow release them. I think what has more explanatory power is to look to the effects of the division of labor, where we live in a society that asks us to...
You think we live in a society?
Yeah. Which asks us to turn off every part of ourselves except one. And to use Adam Smith's example, we just hammer away at pins all day. And I think a lot of people feel this very acutely when they're trying to find work, they're trying to find a way of life that appeals to them, that doesn't ask them to destroy almost everything about themselves except the one thing. And I think that's really like the baseline suppression that we undergo in civilization, and that the aggressive drives make sense to me as being a result of that. It's not that the aggressivity is primordial, it's that our creative potentials are primordial, that are suppressed through the division of labor, and then aggressivity is a response to that. Which is why I think the sort of Fight Club movie, Tyler Durden ideology, is ultimately very reactionary and conservative, and doesn't get to the heart of the matter. Although focusing on a commodity like duvet covers is at least a decent start.
Wait, who's duvet?
A duvet is like a comforter, right?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So
I'm exempt from Tyler Durden's critique because I don't know what a duvet is.
I think you were saying I thought you were saying the name of the director because I didn't know. So anyway, that tells you how in touch I am with fancy furniture. But yeah, Dude Snap says gamers rise up, absolutely. And then but the other thing Iconoplast said that we have to touch on before I read this quote is the only Hegel I read was The Philosophy of Right, and it's so readable. So obviously that's relative. John Stuart Mill is very readable to me now, but was actually extremely difficult before I cracked my teeth on Being in Time. So it's all relative. But the quote that so it's in the chat. If anyone wants to look at the chat, you can just see it right there. But I'm going to read it off, and that is from Estranged Labor, from the Economic Manuscripts of 1844. These are all free and available in the Marxist.org archive. You can listen to them on apps that will read stuff to you. A lot of it will go over your head, but upon re-listening, you'll start to get it more and more. You got to trust yourself to understand. So in the moment, if you're confused, a lot of times you might understand it. If you come back to it 2 weeks later, you'll be like, oh my God, I actually had this thought like a few days ago, and I thought that it was an original thought. I didn't realize that I actually got that. Anyway, you know what I mean? So
no, that's very real.
I'm trying to encourage people, like it's more accessible than it might seem. But yeah, so I remember this really stood out to me because I was in a political philosophy class. I had been taught the whole, Hobbes, Rousseau, Locke into liberalism, tango. And then Marx was kind of just presented as cliff notes and not to be taken very seriously. And so I knew a professor who seemed to take Marx more seriously, and so I went to him, and he told me to read Estranged Labor. And it's like right there on the first page, I think, maybe second page, it says, "Do not let us go back to a fictitious primordial condition, as a political economist does." A fictitious primordial condition. Primordial meaning originary, fictitious meaning it's a fantasy. So let's not go back to a fictitious, some fantasy of an original state of affairs. He says, when that political economist tries to explain what's going on, he does this. And they were all he's at that point. Such a primordial condition explains nothing. It merely pushes the question away into a gray, nebulous distance. The economist assumes in the form of a fact, of an event, what he is supposed to deduce, namely, the necessary relationship between two things. So first of all, it's begging the question. He says for example, people are assuming things about the division of labor and exchange, for instance. Thus, the theologian explains the origin of evil by the fall of man. That is, they assume as a fact, in historical form, what has to be explained. And then this is the big point, if you're new to Marx, but we proceed from an actual economic fact. What is that fact, my friends? I'm about to paste it into the chat, if I can find it. Well, hold on.
What is the fact?
Well, I know exactly what it is, but I'm not going to summarize because his words are much better than mine. I mean, it's labor and the exploitation of labor. That's but it's the richer, the harder you work, the poorer you are. What's going on there?
Yeah.
He says, we proceed from an actual economic fact. The worker becomes all the poorer, the more wealth they produce, the more their production increases in power and size. The worker becomes an ever cheaper commodity, the more commodity they create. The devaluation of the world of people is in direct proportion to the increasing value of the world of things. I'm going to paste this in here so you can see it. Labor produces not only commodities, it produces itself, the worker, as a commodity. And this at the same rate at which it produces commodities in general. This is the point of departure for the entire project. And so when people a lot of times, because I consider myself to be in this tradition, critique of political economy, which means that I have some, that's Papa Marx who said that. I have a little bit of like appreciation for Papa Marx when he sets this project out, but I don't worship him. And I don't take the entire manifesto as gospel. I just think that this is the most important project, and that this is my point of departure for everything that I'm doing as well. Right there. That's the economic fact to begin with, is that the more we produce, the poorer we become. Why is that?
Yeah, I think that's fundamental. Especially in lieu of this sort of whole Jordan Peterson thing of like nihilism and nihilistic young men. This is where I think the Marxian Hegelian tradition is better than the Nietzschean existentialism tradition. I'll explain what I mean by that. So Nietzsche, on my reading, along with people like Sartre and Camus, see nihilism as a kind of discovery that modernity has made. In the same way that we discovered that actually the Earth rotates around the sun, modern humanity has discovered that God is dead. And now we have to learn how to live with this fact that we've discovered. I think it makes more sense to say that the sort of nihilism that confronts us is a historically contingent and historically constructed state of affairs, which is changeable. And I think that the origin of it is in estranged labor. I mean, what is labor? Labor is our social activity. It's what we put our time energy into. And when our time energy is put into the blind of accumulation of capital for its own sake, and amounts to nothing but our own disempowerment, that means that we're embodying nihilism. We're doing this thing that has no meaning and no positive outcome for us in our social activity. So we're objectively living out a nihilistic condition, but it's changeable. It can be improved, and it's not some immutable fact that we've discovered, now that we have whatever, like arguments against the proofs for the existence of God or whatever. I don't know. I'm curious what you think about that, if you think that that makes sense.
Nihilism is something that I have a very difficult time talking about, and you said something about it just now, and my head went in a completely different way, and now I need you to restate what you just said.
Okay. What I'm saying
which happens all the time. So with me. So I please forgive me.
No, that's great. I'll probably say it's slightly better with another chance. So I guess what I'm saying is I differ from the view that nihilism, the fact that life has no meaning, that it is a fact, that it's something about the world that we have discovered as moderns, and that somehow people, living before the 19th century were just under some sort of illusion. And since then, we've been able to pierce through the illusion, right? I don't think that makes any sense. I think the fact is that the meaning of our life is something that we find before us. It's not something that you decide in your head. It's
absolutely. So this is the distinction between Heidegger and Eline Badu, right?
Okay.
The difference between the two is one sees us all as already, always thrown into a world where we are inauthentic, where we are alienated, not from other people, but we're only really in touch with the superficial sides of everyone, and we only really get trained to be the superficial sides of ourselves. To go any deeper, he would say, requires a resolute commitment to a probably mythologized past, That's the fascist element. Elaine Badiou is interested in a lot of the stuff that comes out of the Heideggerian project because it's so influential, because it makes such a big break from modernity, because it's so useful for critiquing a lot of the positivist types of scientific assumptions that the left definitely was guilty of, especially at its most like naive or under pressure like moments. But Badiou says, no, we need another option for the same problem that Heidegger's talking about. He was a child of 1968. He was there to see the students and the workers join hands and shut Paris down. And he was also there a week later, or a month later, when everything kind of went back to business as usual, and then neoliberalism kicked in. And most of the other academics kind of sold out. And then people stopped talking about how class forms, and then they only started talking about representation from the marginalized aspects within that. That's why nowadays we talk about the intersectional working class, because it's a nice correction. It maintains these critiques about representation, but remembers that class is not just an identity. Class is what 99% of us are forced into, and then we're divided up along lines that marginalize us, relatively speaking. So, and turn us against one another as well. Elaine Badiou sees, rather than a resolute commitment to some more real past that we can get in touch with, therefore grow a more authentic self and gain a sort of depth to ourselves and our experience, our character, etc. Instead of that, Elaine Badiou says it's a future building project. It's fidelity to an idea. It's fidelity to a truth event. What is an event in Elaine Badiou's terms? Communism is an event that he had an encounter with in 1968, and he has a committed what he calls fidelity to the idea of communism, at the same time that he's still critical of how it transpires sometimes. He loves Mao, yet he's still very critical of the Red Guard. And so obviously, you know, there's a lot of argument about whether he's a real communist or a revisionist, because some people like to use these things to write people off. But his whole lifelong project since the disillusionment of 1968 has been, how do you sustain a permanent revolution? Because that's the goal. How do you do it without tyranny? How do you do it without... And his basic idea is one of love and commitment to ideas that are future oriented. And so this entire ontology, his entire epistemology, it's all wrapped up in this idea that there are 4 basic categories of life that philosophy can help us to navigate. And we're about to go back to the chat because there's a lot of great stuff going on in there.
Oh,
but
yeah. I've been
the 4 basic domains of human life are politics, love, art, and science. Science includes maths, art includes theater, etc. These are broad genres. And then that within those, we are able to have encounters that have a lot of meaning, encounters with what could become an event. But the only thing that makes an event is fidelity to the idea from that encounter in the first place. And love is a perfect example, because love, you have an encounter where you think, there's something special here. Oh my God, the other person also sees this. Can we find out more about that? Like, I want to explore this. That's an encounter that can become an event that is sustained and maintained through what he calls a truth procedure that is developed in fidelity to the idea of that love. And the exact same thing is true of science insofar as it's able to have a Copernican revolution. Fidelity to an idea of a truth procedure that you don't ever give up. You keep searching for the truth in that field, and eventually it revolutionizes that field. As you then get another Copernican revolution in Kant, you get another Copernican revolution in Einstein. And then obviously the same thing is true in movements of art and in movements of politics, which is he wants a general theory of change that would apply to all 4 of these domains. And so my game video uses some Elaine Badiou. Hands up in the chat if you've ever seen my game video. It might be lost forever, I'm not sure. Did you ever see that one?
No, I didn't. I mean, how are you feeling with all of this? Is it I don't know. I mean, I would be so like angry, and also I think I'd be very disoriented if I were in your shoes, because when you put that much energy into something and you have all these ideas and expectations that you have and they're just stripped away, I can imagine like feeling like I'm just like out in this little dinghy in the middle of the ocean suddenly. Um,
I'm afraid of what would have happened if I hadn't. I'm afraid of how I would have dealt with it if it wasn't for. Because all I said was that I got terminated, and then I didn't look at Twitter for like a day, and then I
mhm.
came back and there was a lot of hype, and a lot of encouragement, and a lot of people really fucking pushing and antagonizing YouTube, and then we got denied on the appeal, and no further explanation. And they haven't paid me a penny from all the super chats that I raised in those live streams. They haven't paid me for all of the ads that they had monetized for months. They didn't reimburse me for my YouTube Red that I was subscribing. I can't even listen to my music app now. I've lost all of the playlists that I've been building for my community and for myself, because I have my own private playlists, and then I have the ones I share with the community. Ones like I have like a, like a playlist of all the critiques of Jordan Peterson that I think were pretty good up to that point. Stuff like that, playlists like that. And all of that just being gone. Like, my watch later list is like 450 videos, and I was always working through my watch later list, because one of the best things about YouTube right now is that when it is pushing videos at you, a lot of times you're like, damn, I do want to see that, but I can watch it later. And then that frees up a lot so that you can keep focusing on the things that you were doing. And that's a backlog that's also so if I just if I considered the community I built one that is like slow grown. I've slow grown it because I know I've got longer term goals, and being a big time YouTuber is not one of them. What I'm doing with Copy Pasta Agitprop is kind of a little experiment, a think tank, kind of thing that's going to translate into a bigger, more important project to me. But my YouTube was kind of a small community. It was kind of a portfolio to feature some of where I'm at, and it was also like a way for me to work through a lot of ideas. And I had a lot of feedback on some of my videos that was really helping me think through some things. And to have my distracted friends essay and my game essay, probably my two most popular essays, those are the ones that I'm not finding backed up. Yeah. And I am I'm just beating myself up for that, because it's like, I have a designated folder for my final exports that I have backed up on multiple devices, but I just hadn't like kind of maintained it right. And I did bring some stuff over to it, thankfully. But I stopped uploading stuff to my Facebook like about a month and a half or 2 months ago. So some of my best content isn't on Facebook, where it would be backed up there, and it's just not in the folder so I'm still Distracted Friends 1. I might be able to find, but gosh. I've had nothing but issues with that one. And it's okay because, so I want to cry. That's how I feel. I want to cry sometimes. But at the same time, like, I don't usually, like, just, go into it. When you've lived in when you've had alternatives, like, thrust upon you, like, fucking deal with it, or you're gonna get fired, or fucking deal with it, or you're gonna get locked up, or fucking deal with it, or you're gonna go to, a psych ward, whatever. When you deal with these kinds of things where society's telling you to fucking deal with it, and you learn to compartmentalize a little bit. So I have compartmentalized a little bit, and so in that sense, I'm like relatively okay. But this was okay. The day that I was doing the Copy Pasta Agitprop on all the mainstream media videos that were showing up on the front page of YouTube when you type the word politics or Bernie. That day, I was trying to take a day off after like a 36-hour bus ride where I had been harassed at multiple times. Not by people who meant to harass me, but by people who don't know boundaries and are themselves very unstable. One person was trying to steal some of my things, probably, it seemed like, and I was just like, are you trying to find something? He's like going through my stuff. I'm like, you trying to find something? And he just gets angry, and then like next thing you know, he's cussing out like 8 people who came to my defense, and then someone out of those people rats him out and he gets kicked off the bus. And all of this, I'm just like, it's all beyond my control. And then, and then there was like a person who was like yelling that I needed to kill myself, and yelling that I'm not God. That once again, a person who's not stable, they're in a bad place. She did not mean me. she was looking directly at me, and she's like, "You're not God." And the thing was, is like, I walked onto that second bus on a 36-hour bus ride. I had slept overnight. Like, this was a huge bus ride. And I was walking down the aisle, and I was like, well, I've got two spots that are open where I don't have to worry about sitting beside someone. And if I sit in that spot, then this guy who's kind of glaring at me already is going to be looking at me the whole time. So I'm going to sit on the other side where he can't see me. So I sat on the other side. And it would have been a lose-lose either way, because then this lady, she comes and sits on the other side right across from me and has her knees up and her arms around her knees, and she's just kind of like glaring at me like super hard, and she's just like, and she's like, no, like muttering to herself. And I was like, okay, a person's talking to herself. She's like, so then every once in a while she just break into yelling. She's like, "You're not God. You'll never be God again. You need, die, kill yourself. And I was just like. So I finally, I'm trying to read the Grundrisa, and I take my earbud out, and I look over, and I did this. I just went, "To me?" And she goes, "No." And then she launches right back into her tirade.
Awesome.
And everyone else on the bus was really upset with her, and I kind of wanted to stand up and just be like, "Everyone, I just want you to know." She did. I asked her if it's about me, and she said no. But I obviously did not do that. But it was like that was like another 4 hours of that. So anyway, I'm trying to set up like how and like I just had a living situation kind of fall through. It's one of those things where like I had spent like 2.5 months not really being able to build a routine or think about the future, and so I was already feeling pretty precarious. And then here I am on the bus dealing with that, and then I get to where I've just moved to. Here's my address. And then, I'm just kidding. But then I was like, today's going to be my first day off. I'm just going to rest. I'm going to take a day off from the internet. I meant like take a day off from being Theory Pleeb. And I just thought, I'm just going to like tune into this Bernie rally, because Bernie was giving the Bernie's Back rally in Queens, and AOC was opening, Nina Turner was opening. It was power. It was epic. And I was like, I kind of went to it just being like, oh, it's going to be the typical, pro-Bernie stuff. But Nina Turner is on a fucking another level right now. She is mad at all of these Warren progressives. Nina Turner's fucking pissed. And I was getting amped. I was like, gosh, I love listening to her always, but now she's like on this other level. And, so I started doing the copy pasta agitprops into the live chat, because there's 22,000 people watching this live stream, right? So all those people are blowing up the comment sections with all of their own emojis and saying hashtag Bernie 2020 and Bernie's back. And so I started doing my own copy pasta, and I thought I'll do agitprop so that when people come in here, if they don't know Bernie very well, or if they think Bernie's, not edgy enough, either way, they'll hopefully encounter in the wild some of these copy pastas that I was refining. So for anyone who doesn't know, a copy pasta, you just literally copy and paste some piece of text, and you just keep doing that, right? And usually it's ironic, and usually it's not yours, and you're not posting it as yourself. But as agitprop, the idea is that it's supposed to break people out of their little insular, fragile, bubbles of willful ignorance, and raise them to a level of intersectional class consciousness. That's the goal. And the ones that I was using were ones like this. So I'm gonna start blowing up the chat. I'm gonna literally share every one of the ones that got me banned. Here we go. What?
The gloves come off.
So, can you read them as I paste them? I'll just keep going.
Sure. For over 17 years, my labor has built your houses, put food on your shelves and your tables, and now I teach. Never once have I been insured or secure. How many of us will have to die? End wage labor coercion, free housing for all, Medicare for all, reclaim the future, hashtag Green New Deal, hashtag Bernie's back, hashtag free the plebe. Too edgy / not realistic.
Oh, hold on. So really quick to clarify, it didn't say too edgy, not realistic. This is my category for who this is addressing. So I'm addressing. So really quick, I'm gonna actually screen share here. We were showing this earlier. This is, so first of all, this is the can you see it?
What's it?
The Normie to Bernie squads to left to pipeline. It'll be in this.
Oh yes, I do see that.
Okay.
I do.
So obviously this is something that I'm committed to, that I love. And then this is what we were talking about this morning. So most people love the Green New Deal or Medicare for All when they're pulled on each of these issues separately. So generally speaking, the 80%, and the 80% are the ones who are the least represented and least benefiting from the system. The 20% are all kind of benefiting because that's the lawyer class, that's the doctor class. So they're all workers too, but they're workers who it's going all right for them. And then, you know, there's a few people online, see they're online too much, who he's not edgy enough, and there's a few people where he's too edgy, that they're generally, they think of themselves as IRL people, they're not online very much. And I am, in a certain sense, I consider myself over here, right? And so the next two agitprops are addressing these two corners. Okay, so the one that you were about to read is addressing the people on the right, the copycats, the MSM. Okay, so that's what that's for.
Okay, great. One thing I would just add to that from my own experience is that the too edgy contingency does not exist only online. There are plenty of like Maoist, or if anybody's familiar with the Platypus Affiliated Society.
I absolutely agree with you on that. Absolutely agree with you on this. Absolutely.
So there's that out there too, and I would say they have useful critiques of the left for being too Keynesian and so on.
I agree.
And they're worth taking seriously, but the problem is that where they end up is what I call Baroque conservatism, which is where you have this complex, convoluted Trotskyist theory for why you should not vote, and then ultimately just support conservative policies through your inaction. And then it's like, so what good is your Baroque complex theory then? So anyway,
absolutely. No, that's a killer summation, and I definitely agree. Though, because the thing is like, well, we're going to talk about distinctions as an ongoing thing in what we're doing. So CPAP-U, which is PragerU, but for copy pasta agitprop. One of the first distinctions we're going to start out with right here is IRL versus online too much. That's not how do these things actually relate? Because they're obviously not dichotomies. They're not dichotomous. They might be considered binaries, but they're not dichotomies. So then so we'll get to all of that later. But anyway, so I absolutely agree. So then I just sent you the, so for the too edgy people here though, I said, Bernie is too edgy or not realistic. For them, if you push MSM talking points, we will remember you. Not just this time, but every time. You'll never live this down. Right? So, and YouTube could have YouTube could have seen that as a threat, perhaps. Who knows? They won't tell me what they think I did wrong. But to my left is too edgy for Bernie, so obviously that's the other side here. To my left is too edgy for Bernie. Please reconsider your recruitment strategy. A vote for Bernie is a welcome mat in front of a heart/mind open to alternatives to capitalist realism. Yes. And then because Nina Turner, she kept saying Bernie is the one true original and everybody else is copycats. That's why I started doing that one. So that bird was blue when I originally made this copy pasta. And for those who don't know, when you're in the live chat on YouTube, you can, on Android, hold your thumb down and pop up the clipboard, and then everything you've copied recently is available to paste from automatically. So I have these 5 ready and loaded, but I was refining them as people responded to them. So they were getting better. So one of the ones that I was doing was trying to drive people to real channels. You know, so I had add some new life to your YouTube experience and hear the other side. Subscribe to ContraPoints, Don't Compete, Cuck Philosophy, TYT, Empire Files, Majority Report. And look, I even gave Bo from the 5th column this cowboy hat emoji. You know, like I said, I was getting more elaborate as we went on. I was having too much fun for sure.
That's good though.
And so here I am. I'm just trying to relax. I'm trying to relax and have fun and do an experiment to see how many of these I can do until I get a warning. Because I figured at some point I'd get a warning from YouTube. But then I went, you know, after the live chat, a couple hours later, I decided to start doing it again. But this time to all of the, hold on, let's type it in. Because this is a learning experience for anyone who's just joined. especially for those people who think it's all the same and who cares. Let's go to politics, YouTube. So that's what I just typed in was politics on YouTube. And then let's just scroll up. And let's scroll down. CNN, MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, CBS. Same thing, if you type in Bernie's name, you'll get a few from his channel, but his most important videos, even if you type in their name, are going to be below results that come up from MSM talking about a heart attack. So
that's the worst thing about YouTube as far as I'm concerned. Like hosting people like the Golden One and others is one thing, but this like just transparent favoritism towards old media conglomerates really makes me want to throw up.
Well, and it's a relatively new thing, is it not?
Well, it seems like it's something that's getting worse. And it seems like it's like the worst possible reaction to the whole like Steven Crowder thing where he got demonetized or whatever. Facebook is, I mean, this is the thing, is like YouTube is not answering the concerns of content creators, and certainly not leftists. It's answering the concerns of normies who are kind of weirded out by some of the more extreme stuff on YouTube. And the way that they placate those people is by saying, okay, we'll go for you know, your trusted news sources, you know. So it's very sad. It's a very sad thing.
I have to. So MSM. So I was never calling it MSM because I'm not really in touch with like that side of the internet that calls it that, and so it's like very, very Alex Jonesy, very Sean Hannity, which is what Iconoplast is talking about in the chat, which is why they're saying that we need to use maybe different words like narrative news outlets, which I feel like if we can take the signifier MSM and you keep using it, if we can appropriate it, if we can turn it towards our end, so that when the 17-year-old online who has watched a little bit of conspiracy stuff and has a general skepticism against the institutionalized order comes across what we're doing, they see that signifier and they want to know more. And we're showing how MSM works. Alex Jones is not. Alex Jones doesn't show how it works. And so the thing is like, they're not wrong. There is an institutionalized order, and you're not represented in it, and it does manufacture not just consent, but also your perception of what is reasonable, acceptable, plausible, and preferable. Yeah. So I feel like we have to say that. So these MSM copycat things, and me still using these NPC memes, I feel like some people are going to have such a bad taste in their mouth just because I'm using NPCs to illustrate this thing. But my point here is that they're right. I like to acknowledge the point when someone's right and then say why they're wrong. So if someone, so first of all, I want to say that Iconoplast, I'm not closed off to using a different, but I want to explain why I'm using it and then open that up, because if we all decide to start using something different, we're all experimenting still. We could do something like MSM/NNO, you know?
Yeah, I'm not even familiar with this whole controversy over what to call it. This is new territory for the Normie Times.
Yeah. So, but yeah, really back to my story. I was trying to get settled, and I was just having fun, and then they terminated my account, and I had a close. I'd been crying within the last couple of days multiple times because someone I care about died, and I've had a lot of different kinds of loss over the last year, and a lot of this stuff I'm working through on my channel. And so to have it all pulled out from under me has been really rough. It has been really rough. And but the reason I wanted to show you this though is because sometimes I have to do what I call a brain dump when I have too many ideas flying around in my head, so I can't relax. And so I just like put it all on paper. And this was just like everything I have to do for the rest of the year to kind of finalize where I want to be at with Theory Pleeb before I can really dive into the next stage. I wasn't going to leave Theory Pleeb, but the idea is that I don't want to write video essays anymore that are already... I don't want to write video essays where I don't get to choose what people see first and then ask questions along the way and then guide them down different corridors depending on how they answer those questions, because I want to check people's levels of reading comprehension. I want to check people's confidence in the material, and I want to be able to take someone who identifies as liberal down an alternative pathway than someone, you know what I mean? And so I want to have a lot of different, and we don't have the means for that kind of production just yet. And that kind of multimedia book slash essay slash blog doesn't exist yet. At least I've seen some examples that are really cool that I'm stealing ideas from. But as far as your own little island, where you could open your laptop, turn on a camera, and start talking to respond to something you saw on YouTube. Because you've already made an account where you logged in here, it populates YouTube with your own account that is an arm of this. Same thing, like you could say post to Twitter, post to Facebook. Well, what if you never had a Twitter? What if you never had a Facebook? Click those buttons, it's done for you. This is the most boomer-friendly thing possible. And then all of your engagements and all of your productions onto those platforms loops people back to your website, and all of it's cached on your website. And then all of your social media that is on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Tumblr, whatever, is featured on the same page if people want to look at that page, or it's on the same widget on pages where people can sort, they can filter by what social media they want to be looking at, by what are they trying to keep up with everything you said within the last week. Then they can see that across all the platforms you're using, or they can filter those results. And this is, everybody wants it. Everybody wants it. Everyone's talking about it. And we all need to be experimenting with it. And when I say everybody, I'm not talking about, obviously, everybody. I'm talking about the 11-year-old and the 82-year-old that I'm helping, an 82-year-old, and we're going to be calling him later as a part of the show to thank him for some weed that he sent me, and to talk about why he likes Bernie Sanders. He's in California, so it's legal. Because it's not legal where I am currently, I actually had to get rid of it already. Because I just, I don't want to talk about this. I did want to talk about it, but I knew if I had it, then I couldn't talk about it. But what's that?
Get rid of it, or you had to get rid of it?
Yeah, get rid of it. But anyway, he's an old hippie, a Bernie Sanders guy, and we'll be calling him. But I've been helping him with his blog, and I've been helping his grandson with his what he wants to do. He wants to have a video channel as well, and his grandson, we'll show a little bit of that later. But he could be one of the coolest left tubers once he's actually set up. So I got him set up with a computer, and we're kind of working on getting him set up with YouTube and Skillshare. And he's really motivated by how much he hates the Electoral College, by how much he hates Donald Trump, by the fact that he is bisexual, by the fact that he is mixed race, by the fact that he hates capitalism, and he wants to have a voice because none of the people in his immediate vicinity, especially his peers, are speaking to him about these ideas, and he needs an outlet. And the fact is when I'm trying to think about how to set someone up like that, much less the people here in town who I'm trying to set up with, there's about 6 people here who immediately I'm setting up. The learning curve is too steep. And it's so frustrating because anything you want to say requires so much work. So the idea for my website, my experimental website, is that you start, and you don't have to have any knowledge of how to make video, how to make podcasts, how to make anything like that. You don't have to know how to operate any of the platforms that you'll be bringing people in through. But along the way, you're not just learning video production. You're not just learning whatever this software is that's being developed. You're also learning media theory. And the media theory is specifically separating out subjectivity from ideology and propaganda. Yeah.
I'm curious, this really, I don't want to prejudice the answer here, but I'm curious with an 11-year-old creating a YouTube channel, do you have concerns about that requiring a level of maturity that almost no 11-year-olds have? I mean, I can say for myself that the fact that I don't show my face in my videos and I don't use my name has allowed me to have a distance from the online attacks and say, oh, they're criticizing the Normie Times. They're not criticizing me. And in absence of that, I think that, I don't know, it could do a lot more damage than it has.
So that's why there will be coaching along the way with privacy, hygiene kind of tips. The fact is he's going to start doing it anyway. People are already out in the wild. They already have intentions to do these things. And so the goal is to equip them with, for instance, knowledge that if you're using your camera to film something, Make sure that you're aware of license plates, right? Make sure you're aware of license plates. You don't want to be talking to your camera and walking around the front yard, and then you turned it and there was a car right there, and now the license plate was in there, right? So that's why this is just part of media literacy in the 21st century. And right now, kids are just like, you either have technology at school or you don't. And if you're a child of the rich, then you probably don't, because they know how much of a distraction that is to a learning environment. It's all their fault in the first place. But, you know, but then if you do have that, then how are you being trained how to use that stuff? And the answer is like very little.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's a perfect concern though. And Tardy Toes says, I think there's an important distinction between identifying something as corporate owned versus just mainstream, because local networks / newspapers can still have that aspect of incentivized information dissemination and narrative shaping without appearing mainstream on their face. That concept might be deeper than surface / meme level, but it's worth highlighting where fitting. Okay, we will make a meme that explains what you're talking about. I will repay.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand that. Would an example be like Adult Swim, which kind of markets itself as edgy and underground, even though it's part of a media conglomerate? Or is that not the point at all?
Yeah, do you want to expand on that for a quick sec, Tardy Toes? So, the part of the issue also, whenever we talk about something, a word, a signifier, MSM counts as a signifier, there is its denotative function and its connotative function. Every meme has this as well. So it means something different to different people. And there might be a strict literal definition, and then there might be a turf war over what that is, and then there's the connotations, the insinuations, and just like the cultural stuff that kind of comes along with it, because no signifier is ever done in its genesis, right? So when I use MSM, it's as metonymy. I'm using it as metonymy, meaning that it's a stand-in for something else. It's a stand-in for the general phenomena that people are pointing at whenever they tend to be talking about mainstream media. So I'm not using a strict literal definition, but it seems like that we could get something really good from teasing this out further. So to tease it out further, Iconoplast says, online too much moment. Every time Pleb says turf war, I think they're saying turf war.
I also thought that Iconoplast.
That's funny. Did you want to expand on that thought though, Iconoplast? Because I don't want to. Yeah. It was a complex sentence. Let's break it down again. I think there's an important distinction between identifying something as corporate owned versus just mainstream. Okay. Because local networks / newspapers can still have that aspect of incentivized information dissemination. Yeah, because this is capitalism, and because there is power, and because people want to be able to get upward mobility, and people have to please whatever demographics they're appealing to.
Misunderstood this.
And narrative shaping without appearing mainstream on their face. Which is like, South Park is very like anti-mainstream, but very, very much still pushing a lot of the same assumptions and frameworks, right?
Yeah.
At least generally speaking, they're pretty libertarian.
Yeah. I didn't follow up on this, but I saw that they had this episode where they had this like guy in a box quoting Marx.
I heard about that.
Is there any follow-up with that? Has South Park become Marxist yet?
I think that they finished off a season. Everyone told me about it. They finished off a season on a Marxist note, and now everybody's worried they're going to come back and bash that all apart in the following season. So we have to wait to find out.
Oh, okay. Cliffhanger.
Yeah, I think they're probably just testing the waters to see what it's like, but you know, who knows. Dude snaps.
Absolutely. Something I found a few months back, which really made me sad because I was a South Park fan when I was younger, and even though I've come to not like the show as much as I once did, there's still some sort of sentimental attachment that I have for it. So I was sad to discover that back in the day, um, Trey Parker and Matt Stone made a video for none other than Dennis Prager and Larry Elder, um, and about like why affirmative action is bad. Um, and so yeah, they're not just like equal opportunity offenders. They are unfortunately somewhat right wing at the end of the day.
South Park?
South Park.
That's what. Okay, just wanted to verify. Okay.
Yeah, as is Dennis Prager.
Yeah, I knew about him. So you're saying that there's a. I missed part of what you're saying because I was looking at the chat. So you said there's a connection between Dennis Prager and South Park.
Yeah, they worked for him at one point. They made a video for him.
Oh.
And Larry Elder, who's a somewhat more obscure figure, but Larry Elder is one of these black conservatives who will opportunistically go on black conservative media outlets and talk about how like absent fathers are the reason that that black people are behind economically and stuff. So he's a probably an even more negative influence than, well, I don't know. So have you seen Big Lebowski, by the way?
Yeah, but it's been a long time, so I haven't run that through my post philosophical, theoretical sort of interpretive procedures.
This is not a philosophical point. Just that Dennis Prager reminds me of the older Lebowski guy from The Big Lebowski. You know when the dude goes to his house and he's like, "Do you have a job, sir?"
Okay, let's pull that up. Let's pull it up. Do you have a job, The Big Lebowski? Whenever I think of "Do you have a job?" you know what I think of? I think of, what are you, Kelly? What are you gonna do with your life? And then she turns around. She's like, "I'm gonna get what I want." And then it's the shoes video because that was OG YouTube.
Yeah.
Oh my God, shoes.
Isn't it funny how that's stuck around? But I think most people don't know what they're referencing when they say shoes.
I know. Yes, I love it. I love it. And actually it makes me think of ContraPoints' capitalism videos a lot. Because she's a liberal, so her real critique of capitalism is just that you feel kind of empty inside after you buy things, which isn't a very deep critique at all. It's a very real experience of capitalism, but it doesn't get to the fundamental basis of why it works the way it works. So
it's true. It's true.
God bless her.
You know, there's something I think about a lot as making YouTube videos. There's something that Pink Floyd said about the Beatles way back in the day when they were around briefly for the same period. And Pink Floyd said about the Beatles are so good, we're not even trying to compete with them. We look up to them, but we're not even trying to be as good as them because that's just hopeless. And that's how I feel about ContraPoints. Even though some of her, I don't agree with everything she says. At the end of the day, she's doing good work. She's doing good work.
I think that the most important, actually, so one of the people on the team helping me think about this website build, one of the reasons that she is so committed to this kind of programming software is because most of the shitstorms aren't really due to what is said or how it's said or blah blah blah. I mean, that's always a part of it. That's an important part of it, and being critical of content creators is important, okay? But a lot of the frustration that comes through is because leftists aren't supposed to be thought leaders in the first place. Every one of us is responsible for speaking to the people in our lives about these things. Each one of us is responsible for finding our own ways of saying the things that need to be said, and for constantly sorting out what is truth, what is just. And insofar as we are reliant on a platform capitalist model where there's going to be thought leaders who are basically, hashtag influencers TM on, like that it's a system built up for people to basically be to cultivate demographics, to get loyal fan bases, whether they hate you or love you. It's a loyal fan base. That they then basically keep looped into the platform, and and there's a whole like generation of people who have kind of gone into the influencer industry with no real intention of doing anything beyond sell products. And so the platform is literally designed for that. And so insofar as a leftist is able to speak their truth, they're being subsumed by that game, because that's the fucking game. And it molds us to its prerogatives. And it makes it so only a few people get to rise to the top. What we need is thousands more, 1,000 more leftist YouTubers within the next couple of years. Not just leftists, but philosophers and theorists. We need people who are doing analysis and criticism in every way. And the fact is like, if you have a primal identification with someone because they brought you into they were a bridge to some new place that you found yourself, and they were saying things just right for a little while, and then they're not saying things right anymore. Maybe they've changed, maybe they've been consistent all along, it doesn't matter. It's easy to project a lot of discontent and frustration onto them for not doing it the way that you would do it.
Yeah.
And the fact is that's a real frustration, because we need a lot more people being able to say their pieces, and we need a model that's not cultivating the influencer TM.
Yeah, well, so I'm curious what you think about this. Something that I feel kind of put off by in the whole bread tube, left tube thing is the way that now there's this whole thing where it's like ContraPoints, H-Bomber Guy, Philosophy Tube, Lindsay Ellis, I think that's her name, are all like friends with each other, and they talk about how they're friends and how they're hanging out. And it has, for me, it has this kind of vibe of sort of like Hollywood, like celebrities, like, oh, I went to a party at Elton John's house last night or something like that. And it's like, oh, well, if I get 300,000 subscribers, ContraPoints will be friends with me. You know what I mean?
Yes! Say it one more time for the people in the back.
Maybe if I have 300,000 subscribers, ContraPoints will be friends with me. And these hierarchies are like consolidated by these people, they're featured on each other's videos. I mean, we're kind of doing this, right? I mean, we're smaller channels, but nonetheless, it's like what gives me, why am I being featured on this stream versus so and so with 100 subscribers? I don't know exactly how to deal with it, but it's I don't know. It just rubs me the wrong way, I guess.
Well, so my first answer to that is to say I agree with you, and then to follow it up directly with, I don't even know. Wait, oh yeah, I do. I know how many subscribers you have because we just talked about it when we looked up your page. All I knew was that you were smaller than me, and I try to share clout with people smaller than me. Obviously, now you're larger than me. But, you win now. Oh, dang it, you caught up. But, you're right. Like, we do form these little communities, but like as Mexi says, you have to move at the speed of trust, and different people have different levels of trust. And what I've found, because I come from a dirtbaggy past, is that the more SJW type are more hesitant to trust, and I don't fucking blame them, often because they are representing communities of people who've been fucking harmed in ways I can't know. And so, you know, if that's your situation and that's who you're representing, then Godspeed you on that journey, and I hope you do well with your, you know, with your people. But you know, then I find the people who are more like the Swolitariat are just like, just unconditional love, what's up, you know, which is actually what people report getting from the alt-right. And so that, you know, the whole critique of like, well, that's conservative leftism. You kind of brought up how Platypus Society can do that sometimes as well. It's insofar as it can really say that the experiences and listening to the experiences of different people are less important than class or something like that, then obviously, like, I denounce it. But insofar as what's really going on there could be holding space for the normies in one's own life, I would say that there's something worthwhile going on there, and that's all. And then you know, we can never really know if one is trying to hold space for some normies in their life, or if they're being edgy. We can never truly know because we don't know the hearts of one another, and you know, there's a lot of reasons that someone could be kind of doing both, and so we got to remain critical. But I just, yeah, I put out the word that everyone can join me on this, so it's like the people who have responded have kind of self-selected. So,
I see. Oh, I'm sorry. Then I unfairly criticized you.
Yeah, no, it's totally true though. But like, so you didn't get some direct message from me. You direct messaged me in the first place. And to me, because I have been not trying to have a giant channel in the first place, because I see it more as I'm just sorting out my thoughts on some things and developing towards a curriculum that I want to teach in the future. I've been able to cut across some of the stuff with the you know, so smaller creators feel they don't want to reach out to the larger ones, and then, you know, who's in it for clout and blah blah. I don't care. To me, I love video editing as a passion. I love articulating ideas as a passion. That's what I am here for. And if I can get with someone like Kelly Zeos, who only has like, well, now she's got like 1,000, but just like a month and a half ago, she had like 100 subscribers. If I can get with someone like Kelly Zeos, and we have like a really good exchange about the theory in the video that we're talking about, I don't give a fuck what her audience size is, and obviously I want to try to give her as many of my subscribers as possible. But like I said, there's people who have we'll call it trust issues, and I would say valid ones, and that those people, like, they should be, who are they representing? Who are their groups? Because for me, I consider myself as mainly like, whenever I hear something, see something, my question is, how do I take this back? How do I take this back to rural Idaho? How do I take this back to co-workers in construction sites or in restaurants? And so that's like the thing that's usually, that's the space I'm holding usually.
Yeah, that's I think that's very honorable and very difficult to that's a high standard to hold yourself to.
Well, because the other thing too, though, is like, if you're in if you're in like a small town, and I said rural, chances are not that diverse. Maybe you know one person who is in a wheelchair, and maybe you know one person who's black. You know what I mean? Like, at that point, then who are you holding space for? It's a bunch of fucking white people that you've worked with, right? And I think that you still need to know how to talk to them, but at the same time, they're not representative of the international proletariat, and that's why all of us who kind of come from that also need to be here to learn. So
yeah and you know, something you mentioned that you learn media theory by creating and especially putting out the videos, and that resonated with me, and I think it's relevant to this whole this whole discussion of like not not getting sucked into the whole like clout, how many subscribers people have mentality. Because one thing I have found, which is super depressing, is that there is no correlation between how good I think a video I made was, and how important I think it was, and how many views it gets. That
Right.
is like, you're just surfing the algorithm, and it's really
It's impossible.
dispiriting.
It's impossible to know, because especially when I put more work into. So, in my opinion, there's a couple of videos that I put the most work into that don't come across like the most work got put into them, and they don't get engaged that much because I didn't bring some bigger channel on to read a quote or whatever, and they just kind of sit there and a few people see them or whatever, and it's like, no, I want to emphasize the importance of this one. So the one that we were playing beforehand about promises, like, I've never heard people talk about labor power as strictly in terms of future labor promise. Like, if you put it in those terms, it kind of like helps me think about it in so many ways that are so much more relevant to my life. But I couldn't really like emphasize the importance of that video on YouTube, because you can't choose the order in which people see things. You can't evaluate people as they go. There's no checks or balances along the way. It's just like, if it gets put in front of people, chances are it's being put in front of people because they love to hate that kind of content, or they just love to love that kind of content. And so it's just like one or the other. And it's like, I don't want your superficial flip-offs, and I don't want your superficial claps. Like, I really do appreciate the comments where they come along and they're like, for the algorithm. I love that. And that's really important that we still do that. I wish they were using copy pasta agitprop to do that rather than just for the algorithm. But, you know, every once in a while I'd get a comment from someone that's like, you know, yay long. And then sometimes you get someone who comes along and they're like, why would you do that? And it's like, no, these are the only ones that I get anything out of. Like, to be fair, like, honestly. Like,
The long comments.
yeah, the long comments, or you know,
Yeah, you know what? Yeah. Long comments get too much shit. It's true.
I read the long comments, and I'm here for the people who read the long comments, and I'm here to make long comments that will break people out of their friction-free existences in ways that it's where like viruses will get put in their head where they're not able to be satisfied anymore with their life as it was, right?
Right, yes. You know, to get very highfalutin with this, something that I look to as a model for what I'm trying to do with my videos. Are you familiar with? Oh yeah, you said you've read Difference in Repetition, the image of thought chapter, where
Yeah, chapter 3.
where Deleuze talks about the encounter that shatters the subject and stuff like that. That I feel that's the ideal, is to slip into somebody's hyperlinked vortex and shatter their subjectivity to whatever degree you can, in order to open up the space for new possibilities. I don't know how this is.
Well. So Deleuze and Guattari and Elaine Badiou, there is online a hugely disproportionate favoring of Deleuze and Guattari because they accommodate themselves better to memeing, and that's my claim. I claim that the only reason they're more popular online is because they're better for memeing. But when there is ever disagreements between those two schools of thought, they come down to what I've heard called an overinflated idea of differences. What is it? Where it's like they're so similar that they really, really, really focus on minute differences. But
oh yeah, the narcissism of minute differences.
right, which is also what people say about Zizek versus Badiou or Zizek versus Butler. But you know, these are all up for argument. But when it comes to Badiou, though, like everything that you just said about there's a possibility of breaking somebody or giving somebody a momentary relief or separation or critical distance from the dogmatic image of how they expect things to be. how they project onto the world, how they operate within various modes that are scripted. There's a way to break from a lot of these assumptions. Now, a lot of these assumptions we're used to seeing critiqued in superficial ways, and part of Deleuze's point is this shit goes deeper than that, my friends. This shit goes way deeper than that. And so he wants to get at every one of Kant's categories can be deconstructed, which is just like, ooh. So, you know, that's a whole other thing. But the point you said the possibility for something new. And everything about Deleuze and Guattari is about that possibility for something new. But they're also kind of anti-humanist, and they don't really their whole thing seems like it's guerrilla warfare without a long-term plan, and that's just like where I bring Badiou in. That's where you bring in Badiou, because the point is in the future. The point is the idea that I have fidelity to. We might all have a different idea about how to get there, but we need to have a longer conversation about how much we love that idea that we're trying to move towards, and get together around our shared love for how we're trying to get there before we get bogged down in petty arguments about how we're getting there. Because at the end of the day, like, theory doesn't translate to practice very well, and we just have to constantly be working through it, and nobody's at the end of history yet.
Yeah. Well, you know, this is something I've been thinking about recently, and I don't know if I agree with it or not, but I think there's a critique of Deleuze or a critique of Deleuze's sudden, like, explosion of popularity, right? There's a sort of weird event where I released a video on Deleuze and like 10 other channels did, and if you, like me, go to bookstores and go to the philosophy section, like the Deleuze section is growing and more obscure works of his are being carried in bookstores. And of course, on the memosphere, there's all kinds of stuff. And I wonder, you know, people often connect it up to like, oh, well, we live in this like rhizomatic postmodern moment, like Trump is a simulacrum of a president. The internet is a rhizome. Capital is deterritorializing everything. And that's why people are attracted to Deleuze. But I wonder, since what I see Deleuze as doing is as being situated in relation to a sort of anti-Hegelian, anti-Marxist view of history, where you just sort of get these discrete epochs where like a new horizon of meaning appears that's totally incommensurable with the previous ones. There's no level at which you can talk about progress. There's no level at which you can say the bourgeois revolution was an improvement over feudalism, etc. I feel like Deleuze's ontology of difference is almost sort of providing precisely an ontology to account for how the world can sort of just switch from one incommensurable horizon of meaning to another. And my concern there is that, and this is getting to my own particular interpretation of Deleuze, but is that what the ontology of difference amounts to at a certain point is a kind of limit to language and thought. It seems to me that this sort of world of the multiplicity and the pure difference is not something that you can actually think about and describe in terms of I don't know, what we would recognize as rational thought. You can, as Todd May, the Deleuze scholar, put it, you can sort of palpate it. You can sort of get a Bergsonian intuition for it, but you can't fully capture it in language. And so my concern is that what this amounts to are just two things. One is that it's a sort of capitulation to the chaos of our time, to look at what is, at least on the surface, rhizomatic and chaotic and impossible to interpret, and not to say, okay, this is a surface appearance. The rhizomatic appearance of our society is actually grounded in contradiction and the crisis of capitalism, and a refusal to also engage in a way of looking at history that allows you to identify points of progress, points of regress, and also to say there's a better world that we can build. So that's a concern that I have about this sort of Deleuze fad that we're living in. Not necessarily that he would hold these things. I'm not sure about that, but that he can at least be used as a way to say like to just take the rhizome appearance and not say, okay, what are the contradictions that are producing this? Just to say, oh, that's it. That's all there is. You're, being aberrant if you try to interpret it further.
Could you explain? Because I just know for a fact that there's at least one person in the chat who's like, "What the fuck are you talking about?"
Yeah, I just said like some bunch of psychobabble.
Yeah.
Where to begin? Yeah. Do you have a specific question? Because I'm
well,
overwhelmed.
So I guess it's like, okay, so the aberrant versus the rhizome. If you look on the screen, I have a depiction of the rhizome. It's a bunch of roots, and if like that's what a rhizome is. It's a bunch of roots where there's no one starting point, and then this is juxtaposed to the aberrant, which is like trees, which is like flowcharts. There's a point of departure. The point of the internet is just like rhizomes. There's no beginning. You're always in the middle of everything. So intuitively, that carries a lot of weight for us, I think. But at the same time, though, you're saying maybe assumptions about how they're reading Deleuze or something, about how all this stuff works. I'll say what I think, and then I'm not sure if this is kind of what you're saying, but it seems like it just... The phase of naive relativism, of not taking responsibility for the difficulty and complexity and actually trying to work through it, that phase of philosophical thought is sort of like given a sort of philosophical justification to not ever leave that phase if you're into Deleuze and Guattari.
Yeah, that's put it way better.
Aww.
That's much more comprehensible. But I don't know. Am I being unfair? I might be being unfair.
Well, in my experience with Deleuzians, they like to say the word body without organs, and then they can't tell me what they mean by that. And then they like to talk about how it's like you can't know anything or have an opinion about anything if you don't just know what they know about these things, that they can't explain to you what they mean anyway. And so that's okay, but that experience isn't always true. I obviously know a couple of Deleuzians who, like, I've read their blog posts and I'm like, damn, you got something to say. But I'm just saying, like, a lot of that happens, and especially online. And so I just overall, I kind of agree. I think it's something to be on guard for. My main thing is like, why does it seem like people, and it's not just Deleuze and Guattarians, it's also Kantians and Heideggerians and Nietzscheans and Sartreans and de Beauvoirians and Butlerians and all of them. Why is it that people just sign on for one thinker? Why is it that people just sign on for one thing? Do you really believe everything that thinker thinks? Like, I don't think they do. I think it's just that they're so hard to approach, they're so difficult to read, that by the time that you've read them 2 or 3 times, it feels so good to finally be understanding what you're reading, and it's always kind of like a coming into understanding, so it's never really done, and it feels so good to go back to a text. And so, because we have limited time, energy, and attention, and because if you're doing this in academia, people expect you to specialize, there's a lot of this like, oh, I'm a Derridian, oh, I just read Lyotard over and over again. It's like, this is something that Richard Wardy talks about. He talks about in Achieving Our Country or whatever. He talks about how, it's like you got the Leotardians who say that there's complete incommensurability between the oppressors and the oppressed. You've got Lacan saying that desire can never be satisfied, and that we don't actually know what we desire. And then you've got Deleuze and Guattari with basically everything that you've already said. And what happens is the person who's interested in critical theory, they go through like the university system, and because they aren't actually able to get a comprehensive orientation with any one of these person's body of thought, they're instead left with like these little conclusions that aren't even actually the most important things that those thinkers were on about. Like for instance, Butler, gender is performance. Fuck off. That is not the most important thing about Butler. The most important thing about Butler is the ethic of precarity that she develops from Levinas on into an Arendtian and guy who wrote Homo Soccer. What's his name again? Agamben. Like what she's doing there is so original, and the way that she's using these thinkers to deconstruct one another, and the way that she's using that to deconstruct second wave feminism, it's all genius. It's real big brain stuff, but people just focus on a little bit that she said about gender being performance, and they're like, what? So you think it's all just... And then that's kind of like, sadly, the kind of more superficial take of the aesthetic video by ContraPoints, which Radiant 2Pi, aka Radical Reads, has done a stellar response to that hopefully gets to Natalie someday. But, you know, whatever. You know, Natalie's sorting her own shit out, and I'm sorting my own shit out, and we're all sorting it out. The point is if you just take Butler, the person who basically, like, made the shift from second wave to third wave feminism by deconstructing the assumptions of second wave feminism, if you reduce her to, like, this one fucking meme, then basically when you meet a Butlerian, it's like, so wait, does this person, they kind of hooked onto that one meme, and then they made their entire orientation towards that thinker about that one thing that people think about it for? Or what is it? And so I'm just very suspicious of my own tendency to over-elevate a thinker.
Yeah.
Of my own tendency to get an enjoyment from finally understanding something difficult, to the point where maybe I overemphasize the importance of what they said that could have been said in a better way.
Yeah.
At the same time that I say that, I obviously push back against people who complain about difficult texts, because if you have the time, energy, or attention, like, there's work that needs to be done, and it's not just navel gazing. So.
Yeah. I agree with all of that, and I would say it's even another complication to all of this is that, in my experience, in order to get the most out of a particular thinker, you kind of have to buy into it. The person who I think has the most insightful things to say about, let's just say, somebody who decided, like, I'm a Deleuzian, and they worked for like years trying to justify everything that Deleuze said and reconstruct his point of view, and then at a certain point they got kind of disillusioned with it. That's the person who I would say probably has the most comprehensive understanding. So it's almost, I don't know, it's tricky. If you go into a thinker with a sort of tepid, suspicious attitude the whole time, you're never going to understand it.
Yeah. So I remember I used to explain the process of philosophy as repeatedly getting brainwashed.
Yes.
You're repeatedly getting brainwashed by who at the time seems like the most genius person who can critique everybody before them and say why all ideas in the history of philosophy got off on the wrong foot because they didn't understand this one fundamental distinction between being and beings, for instance. And then they give you like this whole, like a fucking 2,500 year critique of all ideas up until time now, so that they can say, but this is the real deal. And obviously it's always an attempt. I never really think that someone like Heidegger, for instance, thought that he had it figured out, because he didn't, you know. Zizek is not done, you know. Like, Butler is not done. Like, Arendt didn't get to finish, right? She was writing The Life of the Mind when she died, and that was supposed to be her magnum opus. So it's like, as Levinas says, the saying is always overflowing the said. Thus is the essence of thought. Thus is the essence of discourse. Thus is the essence of subjectivity. The saying... The process of saying things is always overflowing what has been said. There's always more to say. We can never get to the final point. We can never have the final interpretation of something.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, that loyalty to be critical of it, but also like you kind of have to give yourself over to their game, and that was your basic point, is that you kind of have to play along, that you have to pretend they are the subject who knows. That's how Lacan talks about it. The subject supposed to know. You have to pretend they are the subject supposed to know, so that you can get something from it before you figure out your way out of it. But the goal,
yeah. Because then I would say that's really how the big critique, the really incisive critiques arise, is when you're trying to be a true blood Hegelian and you have this little doubt in the back of your head that you're constantly trying to repress, but it keeps coming back. That's the really powerful critique that you can develop if you're brave enough or if you care enough to do so. I mean, maybe you just don't care.
Yeah. So something I want to do really quick is give you a moment to close out and then take a break.
Sure.
And then I'm going to come back. Just, I don't plan on going for 14 hours today, and I will take the advice of the people who said to take a break.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to give you a chance to close out. But before we do the closeout, let's touch on what Iconoplast is saying, because they've been here along for the ride for the last 3 days, most of the time.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate their contributions right now. So, Tardy Toes. This is, if this is still going, but kind of hope you give yourself a break. Take care, everybody. Okay, for sure. So Iconoplast, also the idea of rhizomes kind of describes the physical structure of the internet, as well as the way smaller content creator movements relate to each other. Absolutely. Rhizomes also helps us, especially if you're used to thinking about things in a tree-like way where everything has to start at the beginning. You're going to basically, Deleuze and Guattari are like, boomer! That's basically what they're saying. Fucking boomer! Oh, you're a foundationalist? Boomer! And like, without the agility, without the widgetness of their, well, I say widget because I make a distinction between the old model of workers, how we used to see workers as either batteries or brains. The neoliberal model, the capitalist realist model, the version that Mark Fisher was always writing about, is one where you're supposed to be a widget. The whole idea is that you're a precarious worker, but you have a lot of skill sets and you can plug into anything. So you're a multifaceted, kind of in between the brain and the battery power of the industrial model of capitalism.
From Iconoplast, to me, I'm like, and then I've got a sexually explicit message blocked. Do you see that with the little asterisks? About Popper's paradigm shift description, about how critiques happen? No, it's Thomas Kuhn's normal science, revolutionary science distinction. Anyway, I'm sorry. I was mostly interested by the sexually explicit message that got canceled. More of my psychosexual problems coming up in the.
How are you seeing something that I'm not seeing? Because I see the most recent comment, but I don't see that. But yeah, it was Kuhn. So yeah, paradigm shifts. Yeah, whereas Deleuze and Guattari, it's like all we have are plateaus, right? And a paradigm is just whatever is going to be the most dominant at the time.
Yeah.
You guess we can't talk about Popper? Interesting. I don't know what's going on with
it. Sucks.
I went into the bot. I went into the bot and struck the words so that no one's allowed to talk about philosophy of science. If they do, they'll get booted. That's
really?
No, I'm. That's a joke. That's a joke. Okay. So Iconoplast says there's a kind of philosopher, NT just referenced at the New York. That's you. You just referenced at least two, where after you read them, you just start pointing to things and saying, that's a rhizome, that's a simulacra. Oh yeah, Baudrillard's really good for this too. But they don't seem to lead you to a step beyond pointing and labeling. Exactly, and that right there is the problem with how some people will read postmodern people, is for sure. That said, I love Baudrillard because his book is short and easily understood. I want to disagree with you in a moment. I've also never tried to read D&G. Maybe it's a less kind of philosopher than it is kind of philosophy reader. Yeah, or it's like a Meinhof effect, where after you learn about the concept, you start seeing it everywhere. Oh, that's called a Bader-Meinhof. Yeah, that's genius. Okay, I need to know about that. That's really useful. Thanks. that's part of the kind of what we're talking about with agitprop. We want to have that effect. We want people to start seeing what we're talking about everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So the reason I wanted to check the whole Baudrillard thing is because insofar as he seems easy, the possibility is you might be misunderstanding him. And the reason I say that is because I had a really good live stream with someone who I know who's read everything Baudrillard has written multiple times. And this person is not an academic. He's just been reading philosophy for 6 hours a day since he was 21 because he was able to live that life. And, you know, he kind of grew up in the hood and has his own like way of talking about these things because his goal is that he can't talk about philosophy unless he's able to talk to it with his friends who he grew up like practically in a gang with. You know, if he can't break it down for a rando at the bar, then it doesn't count. So that's the Dangerous Maybe. That's my favorite blog on the internet. And what was my point about it? I was just saying that
About Baudrillard being easy or not easy.
yeah, you have to understand the system of objects. You have to understand the consumer society. You have to understand a lot of the things that he's doing there, a lot of the legwork that I don't understand yet to really get what's going on in simulation and simulacra. But maybe you just already have a lot of that in place. I'm not sure. But the one thing is, I hope that we can get our hands on that live stream because it was definitely one of the best ones that I ever had on my channel. And I don't think it ever made it to podcast yet. So I do have a podcast for anybody who's curious. So
I would just say that I did not find Baudrillard to be easy to understand, for what it's worth. But you know, everybody has different strengths.
Thank you for the panels, Jax. Is there a way that I can promote you so that you can do that in the Discord? If so, DM me on Discord. Normie, what's your name again? What do you go by?
Sam.
Sam, do you wanna Normie? Hey Normie. So do you wanna close out any closing thoughts?
Sure. Well, I guess I'd like to thank you for inviting me onto this. This has been really fun. I mean, to me, this is just like a great conversation. Yeah, I wish you the best. What I hope happens from all of this is like what happened unfortunately, with Steven Crowder, where his deplatforming just resulted in him getting more subscribers. I hope that happens to you, even if it's not in subscribers, if it just sort of raises awareness, because I think you're doing great work, you're doing you're a model content creator in the way that you bring different people together from different levels of exposure, and I think that's super important. So yeah, rock over London, rock on Chicago. Yeah, that's it.
I'm pumped. I'm excited. It was a good conversation. I appreciate it. I hope everyone will go to your channel and subscribe. Pete, can you paste your link?
Oh yes.
Paste your link to it in the chat before you leave. To everybody else, we're not done. We're barely getting started. No, okay, I won't say that because then people get worried. But we're gonna go for a little bit longer. But we are gonna take a break. I'm gonna literally turn the stream off. Well, that's a problem. If I turn it off, then people go away. If I keep it on, it retains the people. But if I keep it on, then people don't join because they pop in for a quick second, they see nothing's happening, and then they don't. You know what I mean? So my question is gonna be, what's better? If you're gonna leave it for 20 minutes or a half hour or 45 minutes, is it better just to disconnect it or just leave music playing with something on the screen?
You could just put up the Zizek-Peterson debate and just play that.
Host Bernie for 30 minutes. No, I know exactly what I'm going to do. Well, I'm gonna do the rally. I'm gonna do the rally that everyone tried to, the one where I started doing the copy pasta in the first place, because that is so important. Oh, he's live now. End Corporate Greed Town Hall, Marshalltown, Iowa. That's pretty neat. But no, let's do the AOC. Who was the other one? What's his name? Michael Moore. Nina Turner, Bernie Sanders. And I'm going to skip some of the previous people and get straight to the earlier ones, just because obviously if I'm only leaving for a while, I want to make sure that you see Nina Turner and AOC. So yeah, this is what they don't want you to see. When I try to, okay, I guess, here, when I'm trying to do this, here you go. Watch, okay. Oh, Bernie, I put a U in there. Okay. Tina, why am I saying Tina? It's Nina.
Tina Turner.
Nina Turner, there we go, sorry. I can't think and type at the same time, and no one should expect me to. Insofar as you do, you're an asshole. Get out of here.
Is her name Nina Turner? That it sounds just like Tina Turner?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I think so. Right? Am I wrong? I think so. Everyone calls her Nina Turner, right?
Let us know.
All right, fam. Yes, Michael Moore.
From his first documentary.
Oh, it looks like Bernie's wonderful wife, whose name I do not know because this is a weird world that never, like, you never know the first lady's name until in office, right? Someone in the chat blow me up with that name, please. But anyway, it looks like she introduces Michael Moore. So let's do that. Or is she giving her own solitary speech?
I think Michael Moore means well.
I love her. All right, man. Thank you. It's been such a great time.
Yeah, likewise. All right. Do something nice and relaxing.
Thank you. I'm going to go on a nice long walk right now. Take care.
That sounds great. Okay, bye everybody.
Bye.
I don't know why you would take the copy, baby, when you can have the original.
Free the lead.